everybody, to yet another open office hour. Eventually, we will turn this into a podcast opening. Um, so the Open Game Data Community is an NSF-funded research incubator uh, looking to bring together a collective of researchers interested in understanding or advancing our scientific understanding of thinking, learning, and decision-making using data generated in and around games. We're interested in compiling a set of best practices on how to do this kind of research and build some infrastructure. We have a bunch of resources that already exist, like the Open Game Data website hosted at Field Day, these open office hour chats, and we also have a Slack. How these sessions work, I think everybody's been at least a couple of these by now, but essentially they're inspired by a series of sessions we used to do with the Statistical Education Research Group at Carnegie Mellon, where someone would present on a topic that they were doing like literally in progress, and members of the stats faculty would kind of work with them like it was an office hour, except they do it publicly. And so you could learn a bunch of stuff by seeing how experts think through their process. Some things to keep in mind. So our presenters are showing their work in progress. It's usually not something that's done. So bear in mind that that takes some courage to do. Our goal is really to help presenters make progress on their own work, but it's also for learning for everybody involved. So if somebody raises an idea, something, you have a question, feel free to raise your hand and ask. And for that, we'll hand off to Dave, who's going to give us an update on kind of the ongoings of turning open game data into the infrastructure that we want it to be.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, so this is going to be a little one that we're definitely like in flight, right? So this is a good time to like, this is gonna be a discussion-rich talk today for sure. I started making slides, and then as soon as I did, I was like, this is kind of a waste of time. So instead, what I want to do is just use the document itself as our guide. And let me give a little bit of context and background and all that stuff. So I forgot what year, 2022, let's say, approximately. We got a Learning Agency Tools Competition Award that was the first funding we ever got to actually work on infrastructure as infrastructure. It had a really nice deliverable from that project, which is that we got the original Open Game Data website set up. And Jen and Erik and Luke and I and some other folks all went to the Learning Analytics and Knowledge Conference, and we did a workshop, and it was kind of our first workshop, and we, somewhere in the middle of that, started these open office hours and set up a Slack, and basic infrastructure was made. That was great. In the next step, we were kind of courted by and applied to an NSF research infrastructure incubator, and that took us the next round. And some of the big deliverables from that was doing some researcher interviews to try to figure out what infrastructure game data people needed, and even who are the game data people, like what is that audience. I think we had a total of something like 30 pilots at one point that we were tracking. And we did, again, office hours, Slack, lots of conversations, and some workshop-y kinds of things again. So at the end of that project, we're kind of like we have been incubated to learn things. Like that's kind of where we're at in the timeline of this project. We have been learning things. And where we are heading, and this is good just to make sure that like, specifically like Jesse and Jen and Paul, I guess, all just to kind of get this message, is that informally through all of that, all those interviews, all those meetings, all those workshops, we've concluded that there is something here that folks really need and want. And we've also concluded that holding it inside of a university is probably the wrong move structurally. And that we need to be thinking about this not just in terms of let's go get a bunch of money from a federal funder and then do a thing with that, but we should be thinking about building a sustainable organization now, and knowing that grants are one of the inputs to that, and they always help move things along, but we needed to be building an organization now that's viable and that makes sense. So we're at this really interesting time with the project where we already are doing some of these things, but we're doing it on the fumes of funding, and we're architecting the next thing. And one of the other big influences I think that came into this is that pretty rapidly, when listening to researchers, you realize that when they talk about infrastructure, or when we ask about infrastructure that's needed for games and game research, the immediate thing that everybody talks about is distribution. Like it comes up before data pipelines or anything like that. The fundamental problem of we need people to be playing our games and there isn't good ways to do that came up right away. Erik and I identified that at a workshop that we were at, and that was really interesting. And then another one that started to come up right away too is that you realize that as we were thinking about who would be using such a service, that something like a studio or the ability to change games is really important too, and that can be really hard for researchers to boot up that capacity. So you start putting all this together, and what we realized is that we don't just need data pipelines and a data infrastructure, we actually need something kind of bigger than that. And when you really kind of squint and look at all the parts that are needed, effectively what you see is we need a scaled up version of Field Day, like the organization we already kind of started piloting in Wisconsin. So this report that we're going to talk about today has this premise within it that the thing that we need to build and the organization that we're proposing actually looks like something like a Field Day 2.0. It's like, let's take the parts that we've already piloted and had some success with and think about them all as potential services, and then go talk to researchers and ask which ones do you need and in what order and all that. Okay, so that's quite a bit of background and setup for like where this is at. So let me just share my screen, and I think it makes a lot of sense to walk through this a little bit. And then just to kind of like lay out a goal for today, we just kind of wrapped up this little report, and what I'm hoping we can get out of this is some interesting discussion, kind of reflecting on our field and reflecting on some of the answers that some of the results that we got on this. And I think that discussion is going to be really helpful in the next steps that come out of this. But at minimum, it's a nice reflection on what we've learned in the last couple of years, and specifically in this last like survey and interview. Okay, so this little report, we put a bow on it. We put it up to archive. Hopefully the number, and it'll be published there soon. We knew we wanted to just get something in the public. It certainly is not a static done thing. This is like one version. We'll probably publish another one of these next year. But it's a snapshot of what we did right now. This document you are free to browse. I'll just share the Google link with you so that you can hop around in it and not have to look through my screen share. But it'll be up on archive as a PDF here imminently. So I think I went through some of the goals in context. For methods, I'll just mention that we compiled a list of a little under 120, so 119 people that have been circling around the open game data world, either survey, invited to also do an interview with us. So what we're really looking at is the synthesis of those two sets of data together. It wasn't a super these were all focused on researchers though. So that was our primary thing, is finding out what do educational researchers need. I'll skip this. Well, I guess I can say that everybody, is basically a researcher, but very quickly, you realize that the early career researchers are often different than late career researchers. So we kind of split that out and may talk about that at different phases. It's also probably worth mentioning that some of these groups, some of these researchers, kind of had a studio or had some infrastructure and some didn't. So there really was like a nice sampling across the kinds of people doing research. Okay, so in our first topic, we wanted to know what kind of organization does this thing need to be. For folks that work at universities, you know that there are considerations that are administrative, so like who can be a subaward, but then just as a research community, there's also considerations around trust and around whether or not a group seems kind of bona fide, or whether or not they seem like they're a vendor trying to make a bunch of money or something. So we wanted just to ask some questions around that. And I'll just show you kind of the raw data that came up. So one of the questions we asked is, do you have any preferences around us being a nonprofit or a co-op, which is technically a for-profit, or you don't know and don't have, or you just don't care? And this very clearly was like, people don't have a really strong opinion here. You can see looking at this pie chart, like generally speaking, that wasn't the most important, exciting thing. Co-op, notice, isn't even on the board. No one really knows what it is. And we kind of expected that because it's a totally normal business structure. So folks didn't have a lot of opinions about that. So that's what I would take from that chart, is that generally speaking, people didn't have a lot of opinions. Though when we asked this question around, would you be interested in cooperative benefits, meaning if you contribute something, you would get something back for that contribution, then all of a sudden we're like, oh, that sounds good. With a majority saying, yes, I would like benefits. And yeah, about a little under a quarter saying, no, that's not of interest to me. And then we get into this question of governance, which is also interesting in the academic world too, because I would suggest, or maybe even argue, that academia by nature has like an attitude of democratic behavior to it, like let the best ideas win kind of thing, and let's work together. And what we see is that almost half of the people specifically were like, yeah, I would like to be involved in governance, which is a little surprising. So this is saying like they'd like to steer this thing or have a voice in what happens. A couple quotes that came up that I think clarify this a little bit. Yeah, like I'll just kind of put them on screen here for a second, but I'll make some observations because I was in most of these interviews. I think that the first one really captures something I heard a lot of, which was, I really don't care exactly how it works, but I don't want there to be some sort of insider group that's making all the decisions, like outside of my control. Right? I think that would be they want some channels, some pipelines, some ways to get involved, and that just totally makes sense. There definitely was. I think this one's a really nice statement too about being a doc student, and this statement was in the context of, when I was getting started doing this research, there wasn't anybody talking like this. So I kind of locked into whatever was available at the time. But this would have been this would have influenced the development of my program if I could have been involved in the governance of a group like this that was actually thinking meta and thinking about the development of a field and an infrastructure. So there were a couple things that kind of cycled around that. So I can pause and just say, like, I'm curious if folks have questions here or thoughts on this generally, and then I'll just stop there and say, like, what thoughts do you have around governance and the way people responded to this?
I think there's a potential danger in reading too much into, like, do you want to have a say in what this organization does? Sure. Does that require filling out a survey every 5 years? Does that require going to a monthly governance meeting and voting on stuff? Like, I think divorced from the specifics of like what that means, I think you might be getting some optimistic responses. Though maybe that's getting caught a lot in the maybes.
Yeah, I'll definitely say that there was I would say there was a bias toward earlier career folks definitely having more interest, I feel like, in getting really involved, like hands-on, which isn't surprising.
Mhm.
Yeah. But no, I totally agree that this question, we need to go some more rounds on that, I think, and say, here we're proposing some options on how governments would work practically, like, well, now what?
Mhm.
I'd be curious to know more about the like background that these people might have had in understanding that like between the nonprofit and the co-op. Like you mentioned that it looked like people didn't care too much about whether it was a co-op or
No,
or
no one specifically opted for co-op first.
yeah. Like when I look at that, what I look at is there's a bunch of people who don't know what you're talking about.
Yep.
And then for the doesn't matter, like I'm curious within the doesn't matter, if is it because it doesn't matter to them because they know and they don't care, or they don't know and they don't care because they don't plan to be involved at the level of needing to care. uh, so I'm just like curious when they did this part of the survey, like, was there any sort of background given to them to understand the differences, or are we in a situation where nobody really knows what a co-op is? So like communicating what a co-op would look like becomes really important.
Yeah, I think because we had almost 100% of the people that took the survey also did an interview, I can say that when they took the survey, they did not understand what a co-op was.
Sure.
And then even as we talked about it a little bit, it
Mhm.
also, co-op by definition is such an open-ended structure that
Sure.
it kind of rings to the question that Erik had, which was like, even after we use the word co-op, it's like, well, what kind? Like, what are the rules of it? Like, what co-op? So
Yeah.
at the end, I think the main conclusion I took from all of this is that, generally speaking, no one cares, like at a really high level, for better or worse. Like, we didn't get anybody who was like, no, it has to be a nonprofit, otherwise I won't trust it. It was
Yeah.
more practical than that. It was more like, well, we want there to be some channels for being involved, and we
Yeah.
want it to be stable, and we want it to like meet the administrative needs of our universities. But outside of that, and that actually was something that someone basically said, was like, as long as it meets those requirements, I really don't care like what the
Yeah.
governing structure is.
I could see it being that it's possible that this just isn't people's first question. Like, maybe they will care a lot more when there's a better picture of what the thing is
Yeah, I
and
think
what
you're
the
right.
pieces are. And then it's, well, now that I have like, yeah, like I probably wouldn't lead a survey with these questions. I would probably backload them after you. Like,
Yeah,
here's
that
what the
makes
whole thing is, and how do you think it should be organized and managed?
I think we're going to get a lot more from this in the next round, where we start putting out potential organization structures and say, like, now let's respond to these. That's what happened. This is not in this report, but that's what happened with our team. We had a little bit of a workshop here in Madison, and when we were discussing how nonprofits and co-ops and for-profits and university labs work, our team had a very strong negative reaction against nonprofits, in that the way that you bring in a board and then the executive director is really, it's like it's the job of the board to make a lot of decisions, and that the board has a lot of control. And I know like the team so far had kind of been like, well, we don't like the idea of there being these people from other organizations that would have, direct influence on whether we go left or right, because we're trying to do something novel, and they didn't do it. So why would we take advice from them? So I found that to be very interesting, that there was some pushback against the structure of a nonprofit once we got into the nature of like, well, who would make decisions and in what way. But among the researchers, the big thing was it felt like we don't care yet. let's dig into services and move forward from that. So the nature of these questions were that we knew, at the end of the day, what we're proposing as an infrastructure would be that there would be certain services provided, right? And the question that really comes up is, which ones have the most interest and which ones should we prioritize development? Because obviously we're not going to make all of them go live at the same moment. And then generally speaking, like what are the kinds of, what this kind of informs is the personas, like who are the kinds of people that need the services? Are there categories inside of that? So that was kind of the aim of this. And we started with that package of things around game distribution. So again, I'll get right into the details of it. We basically put these words up on a survey and said, how important are these to you and do you need them? And the scale that we gave them is, yes, I would use this. Maybe I already do this myself. I'm not interested at all, or I'm not sure. And then for this table, we kind of summed them together to get kind of a positive sentiment versus kind of a negative. And if you just sort them by that, some of the things that we saw right at the top is these two tie. So yes, distribution. Like I give you a game, you get players for it, and then the analytics to go with it. Like, and then tell me how many players I had. Like those two top, with 80% of people saying, yes, I'm interested in that part. And then what we packaged with this is a couple other things. So you can see the next three kind of come in a block too. One of them was the ability to offer pre-post testing of a game, like to actually do evaluation of a game as a service. And that also ranked relatively high. Long-term hosting and storage of games. And then the idea that teachers and experts could rank games. So this would help them, assumably get discoverability and have some what do you call this? Like stature, I guess. So those three came up, really high as well. This next set of three, I was kind of glad to see where they fell, but it's interesting. So one of the things that we definitely heard a couple people say, and we didn't argue with anybody, but we heard them say like, well, I can put my game on Twitch right now, or I'm sorry, I can put my game on itch.io right now, and we can test from there. And I don't think I ever confronted this, but what that showed me is that they hadn't. Like and we had a couple people who had said that, because if you put your game on itch.io, that means you cannot do classroom research because it's going to be blocked. And it was kind of an interesting indicator of someone that just hadn't even run into that catastrophic Monday morning where you realize that you posted your game in a place that you can't run your study. So, so I thought that one was interesting, and we probably need to do some more marketing around this to show that this is really important for the couple of people that didn't think about it. But it still was.
Is there a dimension in your demographics about these people of like the kinds of research or the kinds of audiences they're interested? So for example, like I put my games on itch because I'm for my human machine teaming study, because I'm not working in schools, but I'm still doing science with those games, and so for my target audience it makes sense. But
yeah,
like I actually might have been one of the ones that didn't necessarily answer that question. But do you have a sense for that sort of crosstab of like the kinds of games and audiences they might be interested in?
For the just a little over a dozen samples we've got, they're there, but I don't think they're like going to be super interesting. The data is there if we wanted to dig back into it. But I think you're right, and I think that plays into the personas discussion later down the road, which is we have a bias in all of these questions that are kind of towards classroom research, just in the nature of the offering. And I can say that in the interviews and discussions around it, that come up several times, right? Is that's only one slice of the kinds of things that people might be interested in is research in classrooms. And that was just a little bit of a bias that was there. But yeah, I think you're totally right.
And I think you probably also get other kinds of benefits, even if it's not like classroom almost anything hosted from an EDU address is also probably going to get through a default parental firewall setting. And all of like lots of other kinds of content filtering, I think.
Yeah. That's the offering, I think, is that because we're thinking about it, and because we're thinking about parents and we're thinking about schools, we can make sure that our distribution is whitelisted in all those places. And because of it, that's got advantages for certain kinds of research. Let's see. Well, I don't know if there's anything else really worth mentioning. In my brain, I kind of put a little bit of a, it's not like statistical, but I really was like, from a prioritization standpoint, I'm kind of sorting like this. Like these ones are the ones that were the obvious, like, yeah, let's get to work on these. And then underneath those were things that were less, like strong of an immediate need. Not that, again, they're not relatively strong, but you can see down at the bottom things like game concepting. No one wants. Everybody is. This came up so much. This will come up again too. But it's like, for whatever reason, the researchers we interviewed, they did not want any help designing games. Like they love coming up with game ideas. They got that. They are confident. They got this. So it's just kind of part of the culture of it. Another one I'll mention at the bottom that I think people didn't really think about is like content delivery networks and like really stable hosting. We see this kind of really low signal down here, but then we see this high signal up here. So I think there's just some education related, like people don't know what that is exactly. And
or it could be that they just view that as, I think there could be a couple things of like, they maybe don't know what that is. They might perceive like the 99.99% uptime to be an unnecessarily high bar that, and if they have to pay for it, then like I'm pretty sure Canvas doesn't have that level of uptime, like our LMS that we use here. Yeah. And
I'd hazard a guess that there might be some people that say CDN hosting, I don't know what that is, I don't do it, I don't need it. Why do I care if the CDN has 99% uptime? I don't have a CDN. Like,
or why is that different from storage?
Yeah.
Like maybe some people might have thought that was implied by storage.
Yeah.
And honestly, for a lot of educational games, they're basically the same thing. Like these things aren't huge.
Let's see. This is the graphic of that. I'm not sure it. Yeah, I think we're kind of getting at it. Yeah, I don't know. Any other thoughts on that one? Oh, I should probably mention one thing. Marketing, this is from the survey. This came in really low. And we didn't have a great way to capture this really well. But during discussion, when we talked about marketing, I'll just say it was a higher value than it came up in the survey. When we had time to talk about it and say like, well, we would be, we'll have something like a quarterly newsletter. We'll be promoting certain games. We'll send it out to 100,000 teachers. All of a sudden that got really interesting. So I think it might be another one where it kind of folded into the idea of just distribution.
Yeah.
Where you're just like, yeah.
I also feel like for a context like this, like marketing feels like the wrong word. Like it is marketing, but it is kind of a different set of vectors than like a traditional like for-profit game publisher would be using, right?
Yeah.
It's almost like advocacy or something like it's like they would both fall into the broader umbrella of marketing, but they are kind of different from what you might normally think about as marketing.
Yeah. Let's see. I don't have anything else specifically to say about that. That's kind of not in the document, but yeah, I'm curious if there's other thoughts or reflections on that.
Around the analytics, I'm curious, was that presented in the survey or discussed in the interviews as just a private, you get to see your analytics, or that data for your game will exist for the public to do research on and see what it looks like? Or did people have different reactions to those two ideas?
Yeah, we kept those kind of separate. So there was a big difference between the data that you generate. And so when we talk about analytics here, we're really keeping it high level. It kind of Google Analytics style analytics. How many people, how long, like the really basic stuff. Where, and there, I think what it came down to was evidence for impact is what people wanted to be able to report. You say like we got a grant to do this thing, we distributed it, with this group, and this many people took advantage of that, and they played for this long on average. So we didn't get into much privacy around that data. It was more just people wanted access to it. Yeah. Yeah, I think we can move on from that. Okay, so now we get into what?
Curious, this is kind of, I guess, maybe kind of broadening way, but I saw the one where it's like WebGL really solves a lot of things. Like this is maybe farther down kinds of catastrophic planning than is probably fruitful, but like what happens if WebGL gets flashed?
Where did you see that comment?
The second one. There's technical aspects, including
Oh,
CDI creation discovery, but WebGL removes a lot of technical barriers. It's like, what if somewhere down the line everybody decides that all browsers need to be just Gen AI bullshit and WebGL no longer works? Like, is there a way that we can try to avoid those kinds of extinction level events? Or, I mean, that's probably more catastrophic thinking and planning than is necessary right now.
Yeah, and I think there was an assumption within that. Gosh, we didn't have a question about this, and it didn't always come up in conversation. But the assumption here is that having games that are part of the HTML standard are so much more compatible and maintainable, and kind of the longevity of them is more ensured than a lot of other ways of doing it, pretty much all the other ways of doing it. So I think there was an assumption that ran across these that having web-based games was the optimal pathway forward for a stable future. But yeah, certainly technology always is changing over time. But I think the assumption here is that something like WebGL and HTML generally is not Flash. There isn't a company behind it with proprietary code.
I think that's part of the thing that makes it safer is if it's distributed standard. But I wonder if there's a level, like maybe a question to be put on the service list in the future, or maybe we do or don't consider this to be something that would be on the service list, would be sort of like compatibility. Like if say WebGL versions for some reason, I don't know. And older WebGL stuff has to get put in like a special iframe or whatever. That kind of backwards compatibility maintenance, insofar as it's hosted on any page that we have control over, that's at least a thing we could consider doing. Also, maybe not an actual problem we'd run into, but like given that this community has gone through essentially an extinction once before.
Yeah, and it's all kind of fresh in everybody's mind.
Yeah.
We're still living in the shadow of that extinction event in a lot of ways. Let's see. Okay, so data pipelines. Same thing here. So we can just kind of look at maybe the top ones and the bottom ones. This one just pops out is like so strong. Like, please make some data standards. And this was an interesting one too, because you're like, out of all the things that are on this table, that one's like relatively free. I mean, that's like some people talking, so which was kind of great to realize that there's like a high value, low hanging fruit, thing that everybody really would rally around.
Who does that themselves?
Yeah, exactly.
Like, single person, I do this myself. That's not a standard.
That's like oxymoron. Oh gosh, that's really a great observation.
I think that might have been me, because PBS does have a standard. Thank you very much.
Jesse, I love it. PBS has a standard of their own, an internal standard.
Yes. But it's
do
applied
this
document.
I do it all myself. That's what my daughter used to say when she was little. All myself. Um, I don't know. You kind of look at the next couple up here. They're not surprising. Open source analysis,
It's all the open
search and
things.
viz tools, and then like stuff that plugs in the game engines. You're like, yep, we want tools. That's what I would synthesize those into. Open tools.
The data sets one is interesting because the percentage is relatively low, but it's the most yeses.
Good observation. Yeah, look at that. You're right. Because we had a lot of maybes here in this one.
I imagine a lot of the maybes in the open data standards are like, I gotta go back and re-implement the logger to this stand. Like, there's people that
Maybe.
are like regretting future work.
There's like a heaviness about it. Let's see, really low ones. Like compute, people don't feel like they need it. Help desk, sample data. I would have guessed that things like online model training, people didn't know what that was, or aren't at that level of sophistication. Real time was relatively, we're kind of at the bottom here, but even office hours, like there's mixed kind of need there.
Yeah, I think we could be changing what these things are for a little bit, but
yeah,
the office hours particularly.
Oh, this one's worth mentioning. Okay, so this came up a lot in the discussions, the non-exempt shared IRB. People were like, wow, would that work? And the overall sentiment for that in the interviews was very high once we had a definition of what it was. So the way that I defined it was that we would have a set of templates that could be made available for people to link up the open anonymous data sets with classroom observations. So like copy paste local IRBs, and then also the ability to run a multi-site IRB that people could join in as a site and therefore have access to all of the data that's collected in the classrooms at all the other sites for all the other games. And that both of those things attracted a lot of positive, like everybody was like, yes, that should be an option. So I would say that one really sticks out.
Is that second thing actually like possible outside of a specific set of funding? Like I think like single site IRBs can be attached to a grant, but I don't know if they can live outside of it. Or maybe that might be an individual university idiosyncrasy, whether or not an individual university allows you to have a single site IRB that's not somehow attached to a specific funding line. That might be a thing to explore. But also, the interpretation of the common rule is kind of up in the air right now. So who knows what IRB regulations actually are.
Yeah, and they're always going to change. That's one thing we
Yeah.
know about that. It's the nature of human research
Yeah.
is that it's dynamic. So, but there's a lot of interest in getting around some of that complexity. I think this came in one of the quotes. Yeah, it was like, I thought this was a good example of that. It takes a bunch of time, and it'd be nice to have some faster ways to get through that phase about it, and some guidance around it. I think it's an intimidating topic, especially for early career folks.
Yeah, I think it's kind of there's a couple different pieces of information asymmetry there, like particularly for early career. Like early career people don't know what's going on, they don't know what to write, how they're doing anything. The IRB people might not understand what some of these implications are.
Yeah, that's also good.
And yeah, I've thought about there's like that tool that Rami Ismail made called Do Press Kit for making like press kits about games. I thought it might be fun to make something like Do IRB.
That's great.
For IRB, it's just like
yeah, and
answer these questions, and it generates all the documents for you.
Yes, exactly. And there's a model for that too that we've seen, which is the citation creator that the QE community came up with. Was it that? It was like a citation builder. Oh no, it was a methods builder. That's what it was. It like described how their tool fit in, and it's like I haven't used it myself, but from what I understand, it's basically like a form you fill out, and then it kind of helps write that section.
It actually it takes everything from, so they have an interactive tool that like you set your parameters for your model and then it pulls all of that information directly from your model and it inserts it into like a plug and play methods description, and it has the citations and the references all there for like, this is how you're doing things. Your units are X, your sliding window is aggregated over a window of 5 lines. Your lines are, and it just uses your column headers to write it.
That's cool. What was the one that you mentioned, Eric? I want to jot that down in here.
It's called do press kit, but it's like calling a function named press kit. So it's like press kit parentheses. You don't
Like-
you don't need the do. It's just verbally you call it do press kit, but it's press kit function call. is how you find it if you search for it.
Got it. Okay. Let's see. APIs, A/B testing. There were a bunch of things that were like, that'd be cool. I don't do it yet. You know, like I can imagine a future where I do. But, yeah, I'll move on from that. Next one really had to do with like contracted services. So it was the idea of like, here's a way you could grow your team just for one project at a time. None of these hit really hard, you know, where everybody wanted that one service, but you can see the ones that are kind of at the top are game user research. So that's just the ability of a team to join in and help figure out what the heck's going on, do some custom work, come up with some custom dashboards and custom analysis. And then this is where this came up more positive, was launch promotion. And it came up down here. So as a custom service to be like, we're going to work with you to design a campaign and get the word out about this game that's launching. But even then, those are a little softer than some of the other interests we saw. Tool development, and then we really start to drop off. So like when it really gets into data mining, methods consulting, modifying games, yeah, concepting is always one of the lower ones, which surprises me a little. Like this one really surprises me on the very bottom, because this is a reference to working with PBS Kids. I, as a studio, have been in the role of, we're going to have to move through these sets of milestones so that we can guarantee that we're going to have a high quality output that's going to fit within the platform that it's being distributed in. And so I was kind of expecting that more researchers would be interested in that kind of coaching, which effectively reduces to, if you follow these steps, you're much more likely to have a successful product launch and a good product at the end, right? So we're going to check in on some things, but we didn't get a lot of interest on it. And my reflection on this one, at least, would be that the researchers that we talked with, who are people that were primarily researchers, they really did not want any input on game design and game concepting or any of that stuff. So it's just part of the culture of it. And I think what's going to happen here is when we flip we're going to be doing a similar market research with game sponsors. And I've got a feeling we'll see a very different answer there when someone's paying to get a game made and they want the highest quality outputs and schedules and impact and stuff. I've got a feeling they're going to have a really different opinion on this one. But that's just a hunch.
Again, do you have like what demographic data did you capture from people? Like, because I could easily see things like, if these are mostly education researchers,
Yeah.
like in psych departments, who work on games and stuff,
We
maybe they
listened
have
to,
an overinflated sense of their own capacity for design and could benefit from that. They don't know they want it. But if it's like people that do like game user research, it's like, yeah, my research field is building games. Like, I don't need you doing it for me.
yeah.
And so some of that, like what area they're in, is probably going to inform some of this. Or like for me,
You're right.
like I often collaborate with the Entertainment Technology Center here at CMU. Like it's literally a program where they're being trained to like I have an educational mandate to teach people how to make games, and so I have a recurring like pipeline of people who can do that because they're supposed to,
Yeah.
as opposed to like grabbing a random undergrad off the street and saying, "Hey, build me a game." And so some of that is like, what resources might they have? Actually, that might be a more interesting question. Is like, what resources do you have to get games created?
Mm.
Like, do you have just students? Do you have literal academic programs dedicated to the purpose? Like, and getting a better sense for, like, if you have a game, how do you get it built?
Yeah.
And getting a sense for what resources exist.
I think, let me look back at the people again. Oh, come on, where did we put that? At one point, we actually listed out the people that were involved. Okay, here we go. If you look at these folks that were interviewed, there's quite a range in this. From, let's say, Al Olson, who's like at the NYU Game Center and obviously has a lot of student capacity, to like Jesse, is working with professional studios. And Ethan and Joshua, are kind of the same way, PBS Learning Media. Yeah, Kevin, is at iCivics, so they've got professional studios. I think what I found interesting about that was that the studios weren't interested in that because they had their own process. But then even the more junior researcher folks that were working alone, I won't call out names here, but even the ones that were like really alone, like it's just me and I'm doing my dissertation, even they were like, nope, I want that part.
Well, it's like, are they a PhD student in a game program or an HCI game adjacent program, or are they a PhD student in psychology? Like that's,
Yeah.
And also what is their academic interest? So for example, Paul on this call, got a PhD in physics, but wants to move into the game space. So he's probably going to want to be more adjacent to building the games than being told to just do the physics stuff.
Yep.
So,
Yep.
Like a distinction between people who are in education and they use games to study education, for people who study games and they use education as a way to make interesting and worthwhile games. One group of those people, when they say they don't want help, maybe it's because they need it and they don't know that they should use it. And then there's the other group that just doesn't need help because it's what they do. So like that distinction feels like the thing that would be great to capture. Then you get a feel for, are people declining this because they truly don't need it, or are they declining this because maybe they should use it, but they don't want to admit it? Maybe there'd be a little more clarity there.
I think this whole thing could benefit from just more people and like just getting a broader perspective. But if I was forced to make a judgment on this, I would say that the folks that are doing education related stuff that we talk to just like it. They like doing the game design. And that's like the fun part, and they don't want to give up the fun part. That would be my kind of like high level, like just listening to people talk. Whether or not it was going to turn into the best product or not wasn't necessarily the goal. Like it was more like, but I want to do it.
Yeah. I wonder if you might end up seeing something like the converse, thinking about somebody like Jessica Hammer. Got too many things she's got to be working on. And so she'd be like, yeah, sure. Help me build some games because I have to build, because I've got enough grants that I got to build like 7 games at once or whatever. Like that's an exaggeration, but it's like I don't have enough capacity for all the crap I got to do. Like that would be the other side of it where you might find some interest.
There was some kind of chatter, in some of the quotes around the idea of it's dangerous to rely on students, I think was pretty well accepted. Like, I think that came up a couple times where it was like, it works well for short-term projects, but maintainability is really hard, or, kind of getting it across the finish line with polish is really hard. And so that did come up a couple times in the discussions. I'll mention like one discussion that we got into this in detail was with Doug Clark, and he was like, he had a really nice way of describing it. He's like, I've tried it all the ways. Like I've had some projects where we hired students, and we've had some projects where we hired like a firm to do it, and we've had, you know, I'm trying to think if he had a third one. I think it might have just been those. But I've done it both ways, and none of them have been satisfactory. It was like the student thing was too sloppy. The student thing was too sloppy. The studio thing was too, like, I was on the outside and I needed to be closer into the decision making. And he was like, optimally, what we'd have is a team that kind of does what I say, that would author the game however I want it to be authored, and I would have final say, but I wouldn't have to be in charge of the engineers and artists and writers and QA, and someone else would kind of manage the bits of that. So he had probably the clearest. I've tried it a lot of ways, and this is where I'm currently at. Kind of, yeah. I've seen all the different failures. We tried out some membership models with people, and this is probably, I think this is our last one that we'll talk about today. And it started with two different versions of it, where we had like studio services and then we had researcher services. A couple of interviews in, we dropped the studio services because we realized we were talking primarily with researchers, and we kind of jammed the two things together and started playing around with this idea that there would be a set of free services, and then it would kind of bump up, looking at individual, group, and enclave being the three levels. We definitely learned a lot through this. We got so many mixed responses. At one hand, we had some people that were like, all this is too cheap. If I'm going to write a grant, it can cost a good bit because I'm planning for it. And then there were a bunch of other people that would say things like, yeah, but outside of a grant, like I don't have any money laying around. Like there's not like extra money, like everything's been accounted for. So a lot of that really confirmed where we were at. The idea of the enclave or the enterprise level was, there were only a couple people that were at that level, who were like dealing with larger projects. And yeah, I would say like when we talked about that, there was just a lot of confusion around what it means and how it would work. And like it was like originally we had that at $100,000 a year with the idea that this would replace a team. Like you wouldn't have to have like an operational team. You could just outsource it as a line item, as a service. And again, very mixed responses. Like a couple of people, like they're like, that makes sense. That totally makes sense. That would just it allows us to focus on the thing we care about. But then other groups were like, that is just way too much money. So I've definitely found that there was like a split in the people we interviewed about just what budgets they're generally thinking in, is what it came down to. Like there were a couple organizations that operated large that were thinking in hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars. And then there was a lot of people that were we're always getting by on small grants and maybe no funding from inside of our university. And I don't think we've reconciled that split yet. So yeah, I'll just notice that was a split. The kinds of people that get big dollar amount grants and the kinds of people that don't get big dollar amounts grants are just thinking about this totally differently, which isn't too surprising when you say it, but.
It's kind of struck me looking at these options. You look at like other services, like I just signed up for like education credits for collab and stuff. There's like the free, there's the individual, there's the group, and there's the call us. Like,
Yes.
Like that top tier never has a price tag on it. It's like we will write an individual contract with you, and quote whatever we need to.
Yep.
And I could see that being something where this could go.
The interesting thing about this as a infrastructure is that the individual and group they're not viable. Like it's not nearly enough money to like
Right.
make it work, like from a organizational standpoint, right? So the real offer there for the individual and group, after talking with a bunch of people, I realized what it is it is a form of community development. If you have things completely free, people don't really buy in and people don't really acknowledge it, right? So it's like it's enough money that people feel like, yep, I'm part of this thing. I'm utilizing this thing, but reasonably speaking, we'll spend more than $2,500 supporting a lab. Like they will be the recipients of funding, and it'll end up being the, like you put it, the call us number, which is we're going to be part of your proposal and handle a bunch of these distribution and research services. It'll be those that subsidize everybody else. But I like what this does is it allows an individual grad student to kind of join up, be a member, get some of these features. But yeah, definitely will be money flowing towards them, not.
Another thing you could
That-
consider. Oh, go ahead.
I was just say that comment makes me think almost of like conference level pricing of it's this price for grad students, it's this price for faculty, it's this price for
Yep.
companies, it's this, yeah.
Yeah.
Another thing I was going to say about the enclave level there, after the conversation we just had about what things pulled strongly, the only thing in the list of the enclave benefits that we were just talking about that pulled strongly was the A/B testing. And so I think it would be interesting to see those other things that we were discussing, like the milestone coaching that a lot of people didn't want. Were the few people who could pay for that top tier also the few people that wanted that thing? Or like where does that overlap fall?
Yeah. No, they weren't actually. They were opposite.
Okay.
Just
Okay.
from my memory.
Yeah.
But I think what I really got from that, and I think Erik hit it right on the head, is that effectively what I think is happening here is that the three tiers on the left have prices. They're just signing up. They're joining the community. They're the grad student price for the conference. And then there's this other level of people that are writing big grants that need to get some stuff done that we would be developing a custom interaction with in service of their grant as a sub award, and it'd be custom for them. Yeah, I think it's how that plays out. So kind of traditional academics in a lot of ways. I think the big thing that we would have to do to scale it out though is have some templates we're working with, because the way we do a sub award right now, where every single sub award starts with a blank page basically and a blank budget, and it goes through all these contracting. It's too expensive. Like we need to get in a habit of being able to stamp those out really quickly. Like it's the C package with some tweaks, just getting really efficient in the contract, in the writing of those contracts and stuff.
Not to like sit and like play around with the meaning of a particular word or not, but like does enclave become sort of a partnership as one step above membership? Like individual and group are.
The assumption that we had with enclave is that people needed this data private. That was the assumption, is that there were people that had their data public and there were people that had their data private, and that did not test out. The kinds of people that had enough money that needed a team to support and augment them and infrastructure to augment their projects may or may not want it to be private. Like it wasn't correlated. Like being private is just one switch to flip.
Yep.
So I think that I mean, it kind of takes us into where we're heading next, which is a little bit out of scope. We're at time. So good time to stop. The one thing that I will share is that the result of this thing is that this was really helpful. I think we concluded that the financial model of this thing will not support an organization long-term. It needs to be subsidized in other ways. But it seemed like distribution, standards, basic pipeline and tooling all tested really, really well. And that where we're kind of heading is realizing that researchers are actually not going to necessarily be the financial driver of the organization. That they will be the recipients of the benefits of the organization in a lot of ways. I think that's where I really landed with a lot of this. And then I'll just mention that kind of next steps organizationally where we're at is we've got 2 other research projects kicking off. We've got ones with teachers that are investigating the vault and distribution. And we're like getting, actually there's a pilot of that running this week. We'll have a report by the end of the year. And then we also have one with sponsors that's beginning. So these are organizations that are trying to put something into the world. It's researchers that are not in education or games that are trying to put a message into the world about physics or whatever it is they study. And it's groups like IEEE and I don't know, we've got a handful of groups we're working with like that, universities that are thinking about sponsoring games. So we're doing a research project there. And organizationally, where we're at is that we've created this new website, fielddaylearninggames.org, that is really building on the last 2 years of this research and starting to form a pitch that is really the purpose of this website is that we're trying to form the advisory group and the steering committee and talk a little bit about the value of this thing at a high level, like what it is we're actually proposing with a bunch of standards, a bunch of stories that explain where this is heading. And I've been using this to be inviting advisors. So we've got this team so far that has kind of signed up to be part of the advisory group. And we've got this steering committee that's being formed to actually move this thing forward right now. So that's kind of the phase we're in, is like looking at that and trying to really break out the what's for teachers and the public, what's for researchers, and what's for sponsors. And those 3 categories we're kind of rolling with right now and continuing to do more research. Cool, hopefully that was helpful. It was good to get this report done, kind of wrapped up. We can cite it. We've got a little bit of data, a lot more to be done. We'll definitely replace it as we continue growing.
Yeah.
Feel free to put comments on that document if you have any.
Well, sounds good. Thank you all for tuning in for yet another open episode. The next one is October 9th, and we'll be hearing from the team at Foundry 10, who we were chatting with. I met up with Travis at Serious Play, and I think Dave, you met up with somebody else at Playback Learn.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then both of them were like, can we get something going?
We were both like, this seems super relevant to what we're working on. And so they're working on a sort of metadata schema thing for describing game mechanics. Or characterizing like game space or mechanics or something. It was really cool. Like the thing that I saw is they had a diary study of kids playing games and kind of like when they were noticing that they were using stuff they were learning in other classes while playing like a random commercial game. And expanding that out to something that we could use to characterize existing learning games or maybe existing entertainment games, and trying to make some of these connections about transfer and stuff. And we'll see what they're interested in. They sound like they're really cool people. Sound like it'd be interesting to be more closely connected with them. So we'll hear about that on October 9th. We don't currently have anything on the schedule for October 23rd. It's after Kai Play for me, so I'd be available.
Yeah, after times.
Yeah, for those that are still interested, Kai Play is still open for registration. October 13th through the 16th. Come visit Pittsburgh. But something I might do is drop down a tutorial session on learning curve analysis that I've been talking about doing for a long time. Seeing if I got to come up with a way to lean it into games. I can give like a demonstration of what learning curve analysis is and how it works and just like basic interaction data, but like the challenge with games is really counting opportunities, really. But that could be something I could put down for the 23rd unless somebody else has something they want to talk about. So let me know.
I think you should do that. That sounds rad. I would love that.
Okay.
Okay, just to call it out.
I also will have just done it in my learning analytics class, so.
That's great. So yeah, that's all great. The other one that we should put down if we haven't yet is the 2 tools that Luke has been working on with our team. So we got the text replay tool and the generalized data visualizer tool. We could do a little demo of one or both of those.
So we're on for November 6th to talk about the data schema standard and the data schema alpha.
Good.
That's Jesse.
The
Luke,
highest
and me.
value thing in all the surveys. The no-brainer, please do this. Yes.
And then November, so I've got a November 20th, December 4th, and December 18th, and then I'm gonna stop us for the semester. So if anybody's got something, let me know and we can figure out how to slot you in.
Cool. Thank you for all hanging out. It's always good to talk about nerdy stuff. Okay,
Cool.
I'll see ya.
Yeah.